Kia ora, ni hao, and hello. Welcome to the Chiwi Journal podcast. I'm your host, Camille Yang. This is a special episode features a guest speaker, Eric Jorgenson, at 1729 Writers Cohort 2. 1729 Writers is a group of writers inside of the 1729 online community. We explore issues related to the network state, seek truth, wealth, and health, and share our ideas and thoughts in public. It's a great pleasure to have Eric attend one of our weekly community calls and discuss his process of writing the Almanack of Naval, Ravikant and the Almanack of Balaji, Srinivasan. The framework of leverage and productizing oneself, followed by the Q&A session with the community members. I hope you enjoy the show. Thanks a lot for accepting this invitation, joining us today. Many of us know you as the author of the bestseller book, The Almanack of Naval Ravikant. But in fact, you have so many titles, such as investor, podcaster, writer, and sandwiches eater. I remember when I first subscribed to your newsletter, you asked people to share the best sandwiches you ever had. And I was in Manchester back then. So I sent you the most famous Northern England sandwiches. And you replied back. I think that's the beginning of our conversation about 2 years ago. And during these 2 years, you have done so many different things. I wonder how you will introduce yourself to someone you first met in life. And what are you currently working on?
Yeah, I have done basically too many things for the last 2 years and struggled with that. And don't take my own advice on focusing. So I'm getting better at that. And now I basically introduce myself as a writer and investor. That is at least what I'm going to stick with for this. I make books and I invest in early stage tech startups.
Cool. So can you walk us through the journey of writing the Almanack of Naval Ravikant? I know you have been following Naval for a decade, way before everybody knows him from his famous Twitter thread. So what's the whole story behind writing this book?
Yeah, I mean, I first heard of Naval when I was probably 19 or 20, and someone was like, hey, if you want to understand the startup world in Silicon Valley, follow Naval and follow Paul Graham and read everything that they write, and they will steer you the right direction. So I had been following him since then. And that was, he was just blogging at Venture Hacks back then. So, nowhere near sort of the Naval scale that we know today. And I'd followed him for a long time. I'd learned a lot from him. And I was kind of between projects in 2017 or so, side projects. And I just tweeted out this sort of kernel of an idea, which was, after hearing Naval on the Farnham Street podcast, The Knowledge Project. And I was like, man, that episode is so good. I listened to it 3 times. There's a few things in there that just hit me. And I was like, oh my God, I want everyone in the world to access that piece of information, that unlock that just helps you really understand how the world works, or a new way to live. And, it's clear to me that podcasts and Twitter are both kind of these bizarre subcultures, not accessible to everybody or interesting to everybody. So I just sort of proposed the idea of putting this into a book and compiling some transcripts. And to my surprise, Naval retweeted that and said, happy to support and contribute whatever. But it was really just a half-assed kernel of an idea before he happened to see that tweet and retweet it. And that sort of, to me, took it. I was like, oh, now this is a real project, something that I want him to be proud of existing in the world, and for it to be high quality enough that he's that guy's not an idiot. So it was a really good forcing function for I will complete this project. I will make it excellent. And it took, it was also instant scope creep. I went from maybe I'll combine a few transcripts to I will make Port Charlie's Almanack for Naval. I will do the maximum amount possible. And there was actually an early version of the manuscript that was 600 pages. It was everything he ever said about anything in one place. And I gave it to some early sort of peer readers and reviewers, and they were like, you want me to read what? This is too much, man. So I trimmed it down a lot
Yeah.
for what became like the final book, but everything else is still like available online and everything. But yeah, that was like just started the evolutionary process of a few years of work that eventually became that book.
So before, when you start to write that book, did you have the estimate time? Like probably it will take me 6 months to write, but eventually it takes like years of working.
Yeah, I definitely thought it would be like I thought it would be a short project because I thought it would be a small project. And then when Naval was like, "Yeah, let's do it. I'll give you everything you need," and I was like, went and found a bunch of sources. I was like, "Oh, there's 100 sources here. It's like 1 million words plus this whole Twitter archive. This is going to take me years to do it right." And I was like, it's more important to do it right than to do it in 3 months. I was just like totally off on what I thought this thing was. So yeah, I just sort of, I think like the craftsmanship won out over speed. And so I was like antsy to publish it, but I was more anxious that it be excellent. I was like, if it takes 3 years to make it perfect, then I'll just wait. And it was hard because he kept publishing new stuff,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
like 2 years into the work, he goes on Rogan and I'm like, oh my God, there's a bunch of new content. I have to like sort through and sort of weave into everything else that is happening. But yeah, it sort of worked out perfectly. And I'm, proud of where it ended up. And I'm glad I didn't overly rush it for a book specifically. I've had the opposite approach with blogs that I've run, where it's like you just ship it every week, no matter how good it is, because you got to ship. But the books are sort of a different game.
Exactly. Yeah. So how do you overcome the obstacles? Have you ever encountered writer's block? Because there's so many materials you can use, but still, when you put it together, how is the process look like?
Yeah. Something that I've found that I thought was an interesting lesson that I didn't anticipate is that there's like two kinds of stuck. There's stuck that is just like, oh, this part sucks and I just need to slog through it. And there's stuck where you need the dust to settle and you need to see your work with clear eyes, and no amount of activity makes that happen faster, and you just need to put it down and go do something else. Like learning sort of when you're like, I need to power through, and when you're like, I need to take 2 weeks off is a really helpful sort of thing, because seeing it with fresh eyes really changes. It makes it easier to pick back up and do different things or edit differently. Or just be honest with yourself. Like separating your work, your like editing self from your writing self is sometimes really hard. And the only way to do it is give it some time so that you're not punishing yourself for the work that you just did.
True. So how often do you need to chat with Naval to get his approval, or you have the total freedom to do whatever you want?
Naval was he was very like hands off. So every like, I don't know, 3 to 6 months, I would send him an update and just be like, hey, here's where the status is. But we never talked live. It was all like email or Twitter DMs. And I think his, knowing him and his high leverage mode, he was kind of like, do whatever you want while costing me the least amount of time and effort, and not like, as long as it's like done in good faith. And so I was kind of like, okay. He never said that. I was just like, I understood enough. I was studying the dude for 3 years. So I was like, I think I know what you want out of this relationship. So let me like try to provide that for you. Balaji, the book that I'm working on now, is very different. Balaji is like, I am invested in making this successful. Like, tell me what you need. I'm happy to like fill stuff in. We can. So 2 weeks ago, we spent probably 6 or 8 hours on Zoom, like filling in the gaps and expanding ideas and basically conducting my own like somewhat off the record interview so that I can fold that stuff into the book, which is just different than, Naval and I. One, we've been through it. Two, Balaji reached out after the Naval book and said like, I feel like this would be really helpful for people, for me too. I was like, yeah, bro, you need an editor. So like we're like compiling some of these and filtering down to some of the, like, what I think are the most timeless and universally applicable ideas. So sort of in the same way, Naval has said a lot of stuff and a lot of interesting things, about the blockchain or the future of education or investing or building startups. And it was really a process to filter down to, what is the most universally helpful, so the most people on the earth can get a benefit from it. And also, it'll be as relevant in 10 years or hopefully 50 as it is today. And going through the same exercise with Balaji is just a little different because he's so, a lot of his stuff is contemporary or geopolitical or predictive, like for a specific moment in time. But I think we're getting there. So I think this will be hopefully a really interesting and helpful book as well.
Yeah, I noticed that Naval is very good at narrowing down the ideas and sharing the bite-sized wisdom. However,
Yeah,
Balaji is the total
almost the
opposite.
opposite. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he enjoys expanding his ideas and focus on
Yeah.
seeking the fundamental truth and building the future. Because his content is very contemporary and maybe the future leading-ish. But how do you like define the topic? For example, he says something, but by the time you finish the book, it turns to be wrong or something
Yeah.
changes. Yeah. So how do you overcome this kind of challenge?
Yeah. I try to filter for those ideas that don't change and that are always going to be useful or interesting to
Mm.
people. So I found the process that I took is with both of these books is starting with basically their entire Twitter export. And so I've got, 20,000 tweets in a spreadsheet, and I go through and do like 0 or 1, good or, good quote unquote or bad quote unquote. Like, so just filtering for, is this a timeless, excellent, sort of universal, well phrased piece of content idea or not? And that takes it to maybe 10 to 20% of the total tweets. So then you've got, you go from 20,000 to like a few, 3 or 4,000. And then I go through and categorize all those tweets. And so I'm like, oh, that one's about technology. That one's about the blockchain. That one's about this. That's about it. And so I end up with these kind of like buckets of ideas that he has. And there's a lot of things that are like, trying to come up with an example, like a bunch are geopolitical, and like all the geopolitical stuff pretty much is contemporary. And so there's not a lot of that in there, but there's a little bit about like how he thinks about geopolitics or like the long arc of it. But there's a lot of stuff about, that's where the main themes. And so you're like, oh, there's like hundreds and hundreds of tweets about technology, hundreds and hundreds
Yeah.
of tweets about truth, hundreds and hundreds of tweets about, hiring, or like just like figuring out sort of what are the themes that he keeps returning to. And then those become a little bit the big buckets, and sometimes they mash together and sometimes they
Mm.
separate, and then you kind of sort of move that into an outline and pull stuff from the longer prose into the bigger picture. And that's sort of how the themes emerge, and you try to pick the themes that you think are evergreen and universal and that you want to put forth and that you think are true to Balaji's sort of core message. And so those are both like truth and technology both kind of jumped out to me early. And then it was the process of like finding, I don't know if he ever said there are 4 kinds of truth. Here are the 4 types. Like, here we go. But like in the book, there are, those are organized into 4 chapters where it's like
Mm.
scientific truth, political truth, economic truth, and cryptographic truth. Grouping those together, finding the right sort of supporting pieces to make each of those ideas clear, and then just like threading, I think of this like a jigsaw puzzle, really. Like, part
Mm.
of it is collecting pieces, part of it is sorting the pieces, part of it is finding like the edges where they fit together. And those are kind of different types of work, but that is like how it feels to kind of be in there doing that work. I guess that's how editing is, though I never have been trained to do editing, and I don't
Mm.
know how it go. I just kind of feel like I just picked up a bunch of puzzle pieces and started trying to like develop the judgment to make something great. When you like, I think I tweeted one time, like, if you have enough skin in the game, everyone's a perfectionist.
Yeah.
And like, I just have a high bar for making sure that all those pieces really fit together. And I know that like once we package and publish this thing, it's going to live on in its current form forever and be hard to change. So we may as well take the time to get it right now. And especially the second time, like working on the Naval book, I had no idea how far it would go or how many people would read it or like if anybody
Mm.
would give a shit. So I am even like, I was very motivated by like, make something that Naval is proud of. And now I'm kind of like, oh shit, millions of people are going to probably read this
Yeah.
over time. Like, I can have an enormous impact if I do this right. So like, I'm going to do it right. And these are ideas that I deeply believe in. I want people to understand the power of technology to solve problems and create abundance. And I deeply want to evangelize those ideas. And I want people to be able to think independently, determine and develop their own truth, see through the various bullshits that are being peddled intentionally or unintentionally, and feel agency over, how they can contribute to creating a brighter future. And those are kind of the themes of this book.
Yeah, good point. So I wonder, how's your life changed before publishing Niveau's book? Because I know
Mm,
it turns out to be a very big book. Even in China, there's like millions of people recommend that book. It's very
yeah.
interesting. So how's your life changed after writing that?
I get a lot more emails, for better or worse. It's a little harder to focus on the next
Oh.
book. It is just a different mix of distractions. Like I still had a job when I wrote the Almanack and Naval, and this
Mm.
like that has set me up to be able to kind of like work on my own stuff full time and given me the it covers enough of my costs to be able to start investing, like start a fund instead of just invest my own money. It sets me up to work on this next book a little bit faster and more intensely than I was able to before, just kind of nights and weekends. It is helpful there. It is also like mediumly distracting in that you also have all of the work, you handle the translations,
Mm.
various requests, podcast interviews,
Yeah.
speaking events, just kind of good karma stuff like that, where you're like, let me, let me help and give back and contribute to all the people who are kind of helping to make this thing successful. So yeah, it's a different mix, but it's a really feels really good to have a like. There's definitely a little bit of a change in when you have one specific clear like thing that you have done that you are known for. People will like it's almost like a key. Like you will get introduced as like, oh, this is Eric. Like he wrote this book that you have
Yeah.
probably heard of, and people are kind of like, oh, okay, like I will entertain this conversation, or I will respond to this email, or let you invest in the company, or sort of whatever it is. So I think something that I'd had that in small doses before of like I had written a blog that had done moderately well, but the company that I worked at ended up selling for not a good outcome. And so like that was never really like a big credibility indicator. So having like I underestimated the impact on sort of the opportunities that come or the
Mm.
conversations that you can have when there's like one clear sort of piece of work that you have that is credible unto itself, that people are like, oh, that was really good, I'm gonna listen to you for at least a minute or two.
Yeah. When I look at your website, I see you take Naval's idea of leverage into a very detailed course and write some blogs
Yeah.
about that. Because Naval labeled and framed this concept of leverage. I wonder what's your understanding of leverage and why do you think it's so important?
There's a lot of ideas that he has that are kind of like complete unto themselves. And to me, leverage was the idea left in that book that I was like, oh, I want so much more about this. Like he showed us the door, but he didn't map the whole maze.
Mm.
And I was like, there's so much there. It explains, it is one of those things that like explains a lot of the world that you see. It lets you predict the outcomes of current trends that you see, and it actually should affect your own planning. So there's not a lot that is kind of like explanatory and predictive and influential as far as ideas go. So when even when I was working on the book, I was like digging, trying to find more stuff on leverage that he had said and like wanting to kind of continue to explore that. And then basically, as soon as I was done, I was like, all right, I want to like keep writing about this. I want to formulate my own kind of frameworks for it. I want to almost first principles and like go back to like, all right, what's the actual physics mental model? What is the math behind it? How does it work? What are the other examples? How can I fill out like case studies? How can I map? How can I, once I have this framework, how can I sort of apply it to all of these different like people's success stories that I've seen and see if it fits with all of those, and just like bang that mental model into my head and develop a bunch of ways to think about it. And so I did some of that work. And then in building the course, that was really like me teaching myself and like recording everything along the way. So it's like, if you want the same like stuff in your head that I just put in there for me, like you can go through this. So that idea is probably the most life changing on the wealth side of things, of just like learning to see the world in leverage and think in leverage.
Mm.
And it drove a lot of my thinking about investing and reinvesting in my business and how I prioritize different types of work in my world. So yeah, I think that's a really, really interesting one. I'm happy to kind of keep going into that, but I don't want to turn this into a leverage speech unless you guys want that.
I think we're very interested to know because for me,
Yeah.
for my understanding, the leverage can be the human capital, code, or media. Can you elaborate more?
Yeah, so I think Naval's definition of leverage is actually like slightly narrower than mine. So I really tried to like step all the way back. And so to me, leverage is a model that is like, it is very similar to compounding, and it like sits
Mm.
right next to it in my head, my lattice work. So it is like based in math. It is one of those things that is like quite counterintuitive and seems impossible when you like do the math. You're like, I should not be able to lift 100,000 pounds under any circumstances. Like I should not be able to earn $1 million a year under any circumstances. Like that seems impossible and unfair and basically against the laws of physics. But in the same way that compounding gets like mind-bogglingly big at at the end of the exponential or at the end of the sort of chart, leverage is the same way. And if I can deadlift like 300 pounds with a 10-foot lever or 16-foot lever. I think I can lift like 2,000 pounds, which is more than the heaviest deadlifters in the world who have ever lived. But with like a 300-foot long lever, I can lift 10,000 pounds or 50,000 pounds. Like it gets insane very quickly. And so to me, the four buckets of leverage then are tools, which Naval tends to omit completely, product, which I'm happy to distinguish in a second. That is, to me, that is like a product of your mind. So a tool is like something like an axe. A product might be a map to where the trees are, like so that other people can do something that only you can do currently. So a product is like capturing something that is in your head that only you know. That can be through writing, that can be through an algorithm, that can be through media. So to me, media and code and even like directions or standard operating procedures or whatever, all of those are sort of like subsets of a product. And then there's people, which is relatively self-explanatory, although broader than his examples usually show. And then there's capital, which is like a little bit the loop back to the rest of them, but it's also important in its own right. And it's also tends to be broader than people think. My favorite example of that, so I interviewed Nick Huber, who started a self-storage business. And like his very first, we did a very leverage focused interview. And I tried to like walk him through in my framework, which he had never heard before, all of the stuff that all of the big leaps of progress in his career came from like reinvesting in specific pieces of leverage. And he got his start when he was in school still. And he had paid for a 12-month lease, but he, in his dorm room or apartment or whatever, and he only needed 9 months of it. And so he had prepaid 3 months of an empty room. Mm-hmm. And he's like, well, I don't want to waste it. I will use my leftover print credits from my college library and I will put up flyers and I will lease out the space of this room that I have already prepaid as storage. And I was like, oh, that is an unconventional use of capital leverage. Like you have already invested that money in this thing that's no longer recognizable as like a bank balance. Like you would never say that's cash. It's sunk cost from one perspective, but it's also an opportunity, like a capital opportunity to sell that and turn it into cash and then reinvest that into whatever comes next. So I thought that was, all of those are a little bit broader than you hear at first. When you hear people, you're like people leverage, you're like, oh, I have to hire somebody. But also like Fiverr is people leverage. Also followers on Twitter are people leverage. There's sort of fans, like voluntary and involuntary. There's agencies. There's part-time. There's like ladders sort of up from small, low risk, low cost ways to use each of these types. And you sort of layer on complexity and cost. And as you like prove that it's like a video game. Like as you use each little lever well, they stack up and enable you to like purchase and apply the next lever and the next lever and the next lever. And if you drastically simplify a business, like logging is the example I use a lot of, like if you're just a guy standing in the woods, you can collect sticks until and like barely make a subsistence in existence until you can afford an axe. With an axe, all of a sudden you can chop down like 2 trees an hour. When you save up enough and invest in a chainsaw, you can drop 10 trees an hour. You save up enough and invest in a tractor and a helper. Now you can do 20 trees an hour. And then you sort of continually compound leverage and increasing like complexity, cost, and skill, frankly, because you need to know what you're doing with it. If you just went out there with a tractor, but you hadn't learned the lessons that you learned all the way up through the other pieces of leverage, you can lose more faster by applying more leverage if you don't, if you don't know what's going on before that.
Yeah, true. I forgot who said that compounding is the world wonder, like eighth world wonder. And Warren Buffett, in his 60s, he makes more because he never stopped the compounding trend. Yeah, so it's super interesting idea.
Yeah, he has had basically 2+ entire careers. I mean, you could see Warren Buffett as starting his career when he was like 9 years old and doing it until he's 90. Like that's longer than most people work. And if he would have retired at 55 or 60, like he could have financially, like nobody would have ever heard of him. He would have been a totally like above average but unremarkable sort of investor. And I think leverage is similar, right? Like people who look at the world or the outcomes and say like, oh, that's unfair. That person shouldn't have that much or shouldn't have achieved that, or don't understand why, like, Joe Rogan is making so much money or Oprah or whatever. It's like you're missing the leverage. Like they have accumulated and wisely reinvested in longer and longer levers over and over and over and over again. And the only reason they have those resources to reinvest is because we all collectively like voted with our attention or resources or whatever for them the previous sort of cycle. And then they got that and then they reinvested and they reinvested. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting sort of way to see the world and see and understand how some people can get so much done, right? Like I always like to say there's one name on the front of the book, but if you go to the back, there's 50. And like Ray Dalio is a great example of this. Like you're like, how does Ray Dalio do so much? Like he's writing a book, he's a philanthropist, he's running a fund, he's like, and you go to the back of the book and he's like, I'd like to thank my personal staff of 12 and my wife's personal staff of 8 and my company, is like, oh my God, you've got like a corporation working for literally just you, not even counting the company that you actually started. And like that is, most people don't shine a light on that very often, but it is usually true that the people that you look up to or see have at least in some form some enormous leverage. For Naval, it's a bunch of capital, it's a lot of Twitter followers. It is a great reputation that he has sort of built over the years. It's all of the people at AngelList. For Balaji, it's all of us who sort of believe what he says and support him and evangelize those ideas. It's probably a bunch of capital also, though he's not as much of an investor focused person as Naval. But yeah, on and on and on. Sort of the rabbit hole goes, and it's a helpful way for me to look at the world and to sort of plan my work.
Yeah. So how do you invest yourself or productizing yourself?
Yeah, I mean probably the couple biggest leaps of sort of leverage that in my life have been one, publishing the book was probably the biggest. Second was probably hiring an assistant, which I was sort of, I don't know, not against. I just kind of like didn't think of myself as an assistant person until I started thinking in leverage. And I was like, I am doing a whole lot of, 10 to 20 to 30 to $40 an hour tasks that just keep the boat afloat. But I also have all of this like $1,000 an hour work that I need to be doing to like do the next book or make the next investments or meet with entrepreneurs or raise more money or whatever. And like, it's just stupid to not get some help to do some of this stuff. And it was in working through building the course and thinking through this and actually like doing the math and thinking in frameworks and being like, what is the logical next step to do to take care of this? And I was like, all right, gotta get an assistant. So I hired someone full-time through Athena, which I'm a big fan of. And I have a podcast episode with the founders of Athena. If you want to learn more about that, that's quite a cool service. And that has been a huge sort of step up for me, to help with research or responding to emails or taking care of some of the life things so that I can spend more time sort of working and doing stuff like this. Probably the third thing is investing. That is something that I thought of as like, intellectually that's high leverage at the very end, and you kind of like feel it, but it just the feedback loops are so slow that it's hard to think of it as a really, really high leverage activity. Getting my head around that more and focusing on and thinking of capital leverage, as like put this money to work for you. It will take a while to come back, but it will. And in the same way, starting a fund is like, okay, it's the same motion basically to invest 10,000 or to invest 50 or 100,000. So why don't I do the work now that basically adds a lever to this thing that I'm already doing and will probably only get better at and do at a higher and higher level over the rest of my life. So no reason to delay sort of starting that fund and adding leverage to that. And it improved, the deal flow and the outreach and everything that I got right away too. So that's been a really good sort of, I don't know, that prioritization has been rewarded already, I think.
Yeah, that's cool. I'd like to ask you a tricky question before I hand over to audience. I think people have so many questions. So my question is, so when you work on Naval and the Balaji's book, because you need to be very objectively, not to put in a lot of your thoughts, but to just keep their original content. I mean, have you ever found some ideas or opinions you disagree with?
Yeah, oh yeah. More more with Balaji actually than with
Yeah.
Naval. But yeah, it's an interesting thing, and it is not hard. I have like a lot of, I don't know, reverence for these ideas, and so it's a little bit tricky. The hard part is to say like is to distinguish between, oh, that's not interesting, or I disagree with it. And so if it's not interesting, I don't have a problem removing it. If I disagree with it, but I think it's interesting and provocative, and other people will strongly agree with it, or that it's good to show people, then I still include it. A good example from Balaji probably is he's very he's focused on like transhumanism and eternal youth and sort of life extension, which I think I am pro science and pro longer lifespan and things. It is not it is not super obvious to me that we should be figuring out how to like double our lifespans until we figure out how to like change our mind. So like we are already seeing like governments run by 70 and 80-year-olds kind of failing us in some ways. And I think we all know some like old racist people that are like, I don't know what would happen if you were around for 80 more years and the world kept moving and you did not. So like I'm confident that will work out. I don't know. Like I would love. I think it's in the Dark Forest book in the Three Body Problem series. There's something called like the mental seal, which is like this really cool, like you can do a voluntary procedure on your brain where it basically makes you perfectly believe something. Like it removes all doubt about like something that you want, whether that's like patriotism or your religion or love of your spouse or whatever. And I was like, we need the opposite of that before we solve it for like immortality, or we are fucked. So I was like, I don't know that that's obviously an objectively good idea, as he does, but I think it's really interesting and fun and to think about and talk about. Naval's ideas on happiness, I'm also like, I think there's a philosophical approach I think there's a practical inner approach that he has that's interesting. And I think there's a practical, like interpersonal approach that he does not really talk about at all. Like there's some really good research that says that your relationships are a much better predictor of happiness than anything else in your life. Like for a man, a relationship with his mother, if it's high quality, is like one of the biggest correlates with happiness. And another, some like very long-term Harvard study said like quality of your core, or your like 5 core relationships or something is the biggest predictor of happiness in your life. And on the one hand, there's ancient wisdom and those are very recent studies. So I think that's meaningful, or potentially like outweighed. But I think there's something about the kind of like lonely sage in a mountain cave type of happiness that is just like not quite suitable for everybody, or like incomplete as attractive as it is. So it's not so much that I disagree with it, is just like I would love to talk to him about that and like tease out the nuance or see how he actually like applies stoicism when his 4-year-old kid is like crying or wants another cookie or whatever. Like I can't imagine him like dispensing some of his aphorisms like to a 4-year-old or to his wife in the same way that he does like on Twitter. So I'm curious about, I guess, some of the applications, but that's not a disagreement so much.
Cool. Thank you so much. So where can people learn more about your work, follow your Twitter and newsletter?
Yeah, ejorgenson.com. I can put this in the chat, is like all that is the links to everything that I do, from Twitter to podcast to some blog, some like inconsistent blogging, but that links to the books and the fund if you want. So yeah, and I don't know, whatever is interesting to you there, it's kind of all starts there.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. If anyone here have a question, please feel free to unmute yourself or put your question in the chat.
Hey Eric, thanks so much for coming on. This was really interesting. I'm curious, as someone who has spent a lot of time studying these people, Naval and Balaji, are there things about them, maybe sort of upstream, that are really core to who they are and how they operate that people don't know about from just following them on Twitter or reading their things that you have sort of discerned with your work?
Yeah, I think neither book really goes super deep into like childhood. It's kind of like addresses it obliquely, but I do think like a lot of personalities are formed, relatively early in life and by sort of formative events. And those are, since these aren't biographies, I feel like I really try to focus on like applicable ideas, but I think there are definitely like biographical details about them that are either very quickly passed over or not in there that I think are really interesting, as you say, upstream pieces. So like, Naval talked about like he grew up with his brother. He had a mom who loved him a lot, but a family that was kind of challenged, and like they had a little bit of a hard scrabble sort of upbringing. And so I think I think that he has a core of love, but also was very like felt removed, and sort of like as an immigrant child is very like, let me study how this works and figure out how to work the system, and like that shows a little bit in him. I think Balaji had a probably a more economically improved, but a similar sort of like immigrant kid, sort of challenged in the schoolyard. So I think he learned to like be a fighter and like be a little scrappier and more independent. Almost, I don't know. I think he just like expects a fight, and I don't think he cares nearly as much about like his inner peace or like attending it. Naval had a really rough sort of like first 10-year career where he was like cheated by his VCs and founders, and so like became very sort of disillusioned with the existing sort of core of like VC and startup land, which is I think is what led him to start AngelList, and start it with like piss and vinegar. So like that's an interesting one. Yeah, I think like they don't talk about it much because it's probably not that much fun for a person to like draw like, hey, let me talk about this super shitty thing I went through and then like how it motivated my life. But like if you do the digging, you can usually find and at least draw rough correlations between like interesting or perhaps shitty life experiences and like how that manifested in sort of how that seed sort of grew into some accomplishment later on. And I hope people write, biographies of them later. Like, I think that would also be a really interesting approach. I don't know that either of them would be like, yeah, great, let's do that. But it's certainly doable. And there's plenty of like unauthorized biographies in the world of people all the time. So it is doable. But I think that's an interesting question and something to pursue. Certainly on the media side, when you see that recommended reading, you can see a lot of their influences. And it's interesting to sort of like see who their favorite authors are and then read what is like upstream of them in a media and influence sense.
Awesome. Thank you.
It's pretty cool to talk to a fire cat. I've never done that before.
As you know, Balaji is really big on pseudonymity, so I really try to lean into that.
I was going to say, you got a pretty big vocabulary for a Pokemon. Reading this question in the chat, when you're working on such long-term projects, how do you think about setting short-term goals and accountability and getting things published? That's a good question. I have developed sort of I do in the course, I do these like, one of the frameworks we use is a leverage map. And so I do a leverage map every quarter and just kind of like personally chart what my leverage is, like what I've got working for me, whether that's, products or capital or people or tools, sort of at work. And so every quarter I sort of check in on that. Very long term, I have like, I don't know, a little bit of a like life vision that is more about direction than any particular achievement. But I know I want to like do this kind of work with these kind of people with this kind of flexibility. And I want to kind of like pick leverage things that help me move in that direction. The more tactical planning stuff, every month, I follow this guy, Sebastian Marshall, who runs ultralworking, which is like a kind of opinionated specific. Does anybody else do ultralworking or heard of it or read any of his stuff? He's a little bit of a nut, but it's like kind of perfect for this sort of thing. I'm going to have him on the podcast soon too. So he's got a monthly, I think it's a free monthly planning framework that is like a spreadsheet, and it just kind of takes you through like what happened last month, what are your biggest opportunities, what are you worried about, what are your obstacles, what are the like buckets of life that you're trying to work on, and just helps you like triage like a month's worth of work and prioritize it. So I do that every month, and then like basically every day I just sit down and like do a 1, 2, 3 or one big thing and a few little things that I do in Notion. So that is kind of enough, like big to small for me. Um, but some of it is, it's tricky with a thing like a book, because sometimes it's obvious that you're like, all right, for a month, I'm just going to be like editing transcripts or like combining these things. And it's also actually also ultra working that lets you do like work cycles. And so when you're working by yourself, sometimes it's just like easy to feel like you worked all day and not actually get anything done. And so they kind of let you say like, I'm going to schedule a 4 hour like work cycle, 30 minutes on, 10 minutes off, and just like blow through that. And so sometimes I set my to-do list as like, do 6 cycles of work this like today, or 0 tomorrow, or whatever. So, and sometimes the work is just figuring out what work comes next. Like, especially with a book, you're like, I'm going to work on the book. And then you like start writing or whatever, and find out you're like, actually, like I need to be starting over at the beginning, or like rereading it or whatever. And so sometimes you just kind of like start working if it's feeling like you're like, I'm doing the wrong kind of work right now. I need to like step back or reprioritize or whatever. And that's just like part of the maze, I think.
Yeah, I'll jump in with another question. Eric, thanks so much for taking the time. This was awesome. So I was wondering if you could dive into your investing strategy at all, and what are some of the companies that you look at, and what are some of your criteria? And yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Sure, yeah. So our fund, we do a rolling fund. I've got 2 other partners in it, who are both friends of mine and experienced angel investors, Al and Bo. We are all kind of like, I don't know, founder operators who have been angel investing. And this is kind of like a slightly scaled up and professionalized version of that. So our process, we have a very broad thesis. Like there's almost no technology or industry or market that we wouldn't invest in if we felt like we found the right founders and something could get big enough. I don't know, criteria or something. Like it almost always comes from our network or one degree of our network. It is especially with like being a smaller fund, not having any staff. Like we don't have, and doing other projects. Like we are not like Sequoia, and that we're like, oh, okay, like let's go do all the due diligence and like dispatch all the associates to like go check everything out. And so having sort of that like pre-diligence done by the network and the people that we already kind of like know and trust, is really, really helpful to kind of enable the type of investing that we do, which is like, earlier stage. Sometimes there's not a ton of stuff to go on. Like you don't always are like, oh, there's 20 customers who are all really happy and we can talk to some of them. Like sometimes there's not even quite a completed product yet. So often starts in the network. The most common reasons that we pass, which I actually think is maybe the most helpful way to answer the question, is like either the technology is not new enough, or we cannot figure out how the company could get big enough. There's a lot of companies out there that are like, this would be a great 10 or 20x. The founders would probably do really well. I think they have high odds of success to that level, but we are looking for 100x outcomes, not 10x outcomes. And like, even if the founders do well, there is a scenario where like we don't do well by our LPs and investors, even if we get a 10x here, because it's just not enough to kind of like move the needle for the whole fund. So I hate it when I say move the needle. Sometimes it's involuntary. And I'm better than that, I promise. So those are the most common reasons to pass, aside from just kind of being like, I don't have enough information about, this market or these founders or whatever else to go through. But to me, the more like sci-fi, the better. Like my favorite investment company we've invested in so far is like doing these enormous, like 6-rotor helicopter drones that are flown by AI and designed to build like arbitrary structures out of Adobe. So like they can build an entire house by like picking and placing like bricks of mud and then flying over with an impact hammer to like hammer it all together and smooth it out. And it looks like Star Wars. It is absolutely awesome. It's early stage, like but when you kind of, it turns what is like currently a 4-vendor like drywall, framing, insulating, drywall, like spackle and painting process into a 1-vendor robotics only sort of like pure electricity, way cheaper cost of materials building that is more eco-friendly, captures more carbon, is built faster and less labor and more sort of like location independent. Like it is kind of really crazy what they can do. It is, very early, but there's really scrappy, super smart founders. So I think they'll figure it out, and hopefully, like, we will all buy houses built by drones in the future. But that makes way more sense to me than like a factory approach or a gigantic, like, capital intensive, like 3D printer that you have to like go put on a perfectly flat plot of land that like does concrete. I don't know. So that one's kind of out there, but I like it a lot.
Awesome. Very solar punk. I love it.
Yeah. Oh my God. So like, yeah, I love solar punk shit. So like, you gotta find any like solar punk thesis companies, like, hook me up. I'm in.
Awesome.
That's actually, I'm gonna do the Almanack of Elon after this. I'm excited to get to work on that one. And after that, I actually think I'm going to attempt to write some solar punk fiction, but I haven't really written fiction seriously before, so we'll see how that goes.
Awesome. More questions?
Besides research, any other examples where personal assistant has made a big difference in how you spend your time? Yes, though highly sort of dependent on your personal circumstances. So I'm happy to like share mine, but by no means like a panacea for everybody. In the last year or 18 months, I know we're recording, but I'm going to say off the record anyway. Like, my father passed away. My aunt had a stroke. I got married. My then fiance like moved across the country. There's just been like an enormous number of life things that have happened. Like new rental properties to take care of, like all that, in addition to transitioning the career, publishing the new book, starting another book, starting a fund, like some part accidentally, partly on purpose. I just went from like 2.5 jobs, which is kind of my normal, to like 5.5 jobs, which is like just fucking way too much. And so he was really, really helpful in some of those things where it's like, hey, we need to replace a window at a rental house. Can you go get me some quotes? Like, find the companies, call them, tell them the thing, give me the quotes. And like, that is 3 or 4 hours of very annoying work that like he can just go do for me, and then I can make the decision. We started through Athena. Actually, they have somebody there who is using their EA to run their whole like kitchen and grocery process. So they like pick a few recipes they want to make that week, and then they're like staples, and they just give that to their assistants. Their assistant does all of the like grocery shopping through Instacart, and the groceries are just like delivered twice a week. After like a short conversation, like that was pretty cool. A ton of help in like planning travel and honeymoon. Like, we're doing a honeymoon, and so like there's research for the book, there's research for life, there's it's helpful writing sometimes too. Like Athena has a pretty cool voice app, so I can just like pull up a voice thing and be like, hey, Fabian asked a great question, I'd love to send him this book, do you mind like drafting an email that says this and this? Or, hey, I'm going to talk for 5 minutes, will you turn this into a very rough draft of a blog post, and then like share the Google Doc with me, and I'll go through and edit later. So there's just I mean, it could be a long list. For me, the podcast literally would not get published without him. I record, and then I say, hey, I'm good. And like a combination of Ivan is my EA, and Johnny, who's the podcast editor, like basically take everything from there. And I go from completed conversation to published episode with like just a quick review of like the show notes in the email. So like the podcast would be impossible without him. And I just wouldn't have even attempted including it in my life. And a bunch of good stuff has come from the podcast. Like, in some ways that has enabled the fund. In some ways it's enabled like conversations with authors that I really liked. It might have an impact on like how well the book does in the future. Like, it might become a business unto itself, though it is currently roughly break even. So like stuff like that. When I was and I still am in the mindset of like, compounding leverage. It's like, I'm not going to have less of those like $10 to $20 an hour things that simply must get done to enable the other stuff. Like, this is the right move, and it absolutely has been for me. There's a bunch of other ways to do it. You don't have to go like sort of full-time dedicated, but for me, that was, I think, the right choice.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
That's super helpful.
Any follow-up questions on that?
Well, I do have one. How long have you been with this Ivan assistant? Like, it's been like a lot of months. Like, did it take a bunch of time to train him, like to work well with you and like what you need, things like that? And like, how would you also feel about like the private stuff that you're sharing with him? All those details, like,
Yeah, we just had our 1 year anniversary. It's very exciting. So we've been going about a year. So Athena, what I like about they I think they had like 8,000 applications like per week for a while. So like, and they hire 50 or something. So like very, very high bar for who they hire. And then they train them on like how to be an EA for at least 3 or 4 weeks. And then they asked me like what tools I use. I'm like, all right, I use Google Docs, I use Notion, I use Airtable, and they're like, all right, cool. We'll do another like week or two of just like training him on these tools. And then at the same time, they're training me on like, you must use 1Password, you must use this, and like getting me set up and like sort of prepared to hand over some of the control and some of the playbooks. And then they introduce us and sort of merge us together and then like guide both. They like train him to onboard me and like prepare me to actually like sort of share the reins. We do a fair bit of this in the podcast. So totally, if you're at all considering it, like I recommend listening to that. It is a little difficult at first to like, I'm from the Midwest in the US. That is very like, we are a very like self-sufficient sort of like independent, I can do it all myself kind of culture. And it was very difficult for me to like delegate, feel like I can like assign work. And he's like, so we went through a lot of that. And he's like, you like, give me work. Like I work for you. I want to feel useful. I want to do hard stuff. I want to be like maximum impact for you. So like, don't be afraid to challenge me. And so we worked through like handing off bigger and bigger and bigger stuff, to the point now where I can, pretty large scale projects. I'm like, hey, migrate my blog from, Medium to Squarespace. I don't know how to do it. I expect you to go learn. And he's like, okay, cool. I got you. So like that was an early project that we did. And starting with a big project like that, I think really helped. Because he always had something to work on. I didn't have to like think really hard about what to assign him every day or every week. But yeah, Athena does quite a good job with that. And there's a bunch of other services out there. Some do part-time, some do just matching, but he's got like a community now. So like he's part of a cohort that got hired together. There's hundreds of EAs that all sort of know each other. And so like, he's got a work social life outside of me and friends and managers, and like sort of a feedback loop where like, I tell his coach will email me every once in a while and be like, how are we doing? What's the feedback? What do I need to teach him? So like that, all that kind of stuff is really, very cool.
Nice. I want to do a quick time check. We're 4 minutes past the hour. I want to respect Eric's time. And so I'm sure there's a couple other questions, but should we cut it now for you, Eric, or are you down to take one or two?
I'm okay. Yeah, I'm okay for another little while if anybody else wants to like hang out.
Okay, maybe we'll go to the 15.
As long as the host is okay keeping the Zoom open. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I think Vibe had one had unmuted earlier.
Yeah, it's Vib. Yeah, it's Vib.
Vib. The only pronunciation I didn't guess.
It's all good. That's not my real name. That's 1/3 of my name. The real one is too long for people to get right, so it's Vib.
Vibe Master.
Curious. Yeah, exactly. It's 3/4 of Vibe. That's how I introduce myself. Curious to know, like, how would you say, like, how Twitter has changed your life, or how important would you say like a Twitter following has been in your career? You mentioned that followers is a form of leverage, but would you rather have like subscribers or both? Like, how do you view Twitter as a tool, I guess?
I'm going to give you two equally true answers. Twitter has been instrumental in my life and career, I think. I got on Twitter in 2008 or 9 maybe. And have like very kind of slowly built the following over a long period of time. I have been able to meet and, travel and get to know amazing people through it. It was a little bit of early sort of like proof of work, proof of not an idiot, proof of interested in the same stuff that you are. And some of my closest friends now I have met through Twitter. It's how I became friends with like, I don't know, like a lot of people. And I don't think, I have no idea to what extent Naval just like looked at my Twitter and was like, yeah, this kid's legit. Like he's been working a long time. Like he's not a dummy. Like I'm fine giving him my Twitter archive and saying and providing encouragement. Like I don't know that he would have done that for somebody with 40 followers and a goose egg, but maybe he would have. or the Twitter egg or whatever. Yeah, bird egg. I don't think that's still the default photo, but you know what I mean. I think it has been really meaningful in some of those ways, and I don't want to discount it or say that it was unimportant. I think it's, in some ways, it is like easier than ever to start now, and like I've seen friends start and go to 100,000 followers immediately by doing like crazy copywriting, hacky, maximally like fully Mr. Beast moding it, and like make careers out of it. And I still think there's great people on there. I think its impact has probably diminished slightly, like in the context of other things. Like now that I'm doing, like, I don't think a Twitter follower is equal to an email subscriber. Like I think an email subscriber is worth a lot more, but I think one of the best ways to get an email subscriber is to like be on Twitter. So like it is a little bit of a dance there. But I know plenty of people with like wildly successful, happy careers that don't spend all day on Twitter. And I actually find myself spending a little less time on there now that I kind of am like found my groove. It's a very like, it's a great explore mode. You find like-minded people, you can get connected, you see crazy new ideas, and like, I don't know, that it, like I don't want to understate it, but I don't want to overstate it. Like if that if that like makes sense.
It's been instrumental.
It's been instrumental, but you can also waste a shitload of time, and it is like the definition of like play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Like I guess I would say like it's important, but don't let it be the only thing that you focus on or that you do, because you can still get like platform rugged incredibly hard. You can build the wrong kind of following. You can build a following that isn't like very valuable, or like but you don't even need to build a following to like, you know, be successful on Twitter. You can be a consumer and just like get the best out of Twitter, but like be very intentional about how you do it, because Twitter does not have your best interest at heart particularly, and it's getting increasingly like opinionated about the shit that it shows you and who and how. Like I mostly follow lists and read that are pretty well curated. I use the latest only feeds, so I don't just see whatever Twitter wants me to see through like the home feed, and I use it to try to, I literally try to make friends with it. Like I want to find people that I want to be friends with. I want to go offline, have one-on-one conversations with them. Like it is the beginning. It is not the whole of the work, if that makes sense.
Kind of in line with my experience. I don't use the app. I use the mobile browser, but I force myself to spend less time on Twitter.
I do too. Yeah, I only use Twitter on my phone through Safari now, because I'm like, this is terrible. I want to close it and go do something else. I am like almost happier the less time I spend on Twitter these days, which I think is which is why I'm like a little cautious to be like, yeah, it changed my life. You should go spend all day on it, because like that may have been more true 6 years ago than it is now.
Nice. I have a question about you're talking about leverage and continued reinvesting in longer and longer levers, and how that's led to tremendous success for a lot of people. And it makes me think about the discipline that's required and actually to do that. And so I'm curious of your thoughts about the interrelationship between discipline and leverage, and how you kind of stay disciplined and motivated.
Yeah. It's a good question, because leverage is, I always hesitate to like be like, yeah, leverage, go, great, this is all gravy, because it increases the danger mode of like the game that you're playing. Like you can fail harder and faster, and if you reinvest in leverage without successfully increasing your earnings, like if you buy the tractor and then don't use it as a lumberjack, or like buy it and then crash it, like you, depending on like your margin of error and how much you reinvested and how successful you needed to be over what time horizon to like stay liquid as a business owner, like there are times when you can reinvest in leverage and sort of get more leisure out of it, but there's also times and ways that you can reinvest in leverage, and like you better work your ass off, or like you have made your situation worse, not better. Like you have doubled down and you need to perform and achieve and like have this outcome in order to reach that new level. It is definitely a double-edged sword, and you can hurt yourself more playing with more leverage than you can without it. And that is not always, that is true of financial leverage for sure. Like if you're taking debt in like the traditional, like the Wall Street phrase of the word leverage, that is definitely true. But it is also true with like, what is the impact if you tweet something that like people do not like that is an off-color opinion with 100 followers versus 100,000 followers. Like, you can get socially wrecked with a big following way quicker than you can with a small following because nobody cares. And if you have a big team and you fire the wrong people, or they leave, like, just like life can fall apart way faster in some cases, or it gets harder to manage. So I think maintaining some discipline around like the right ratio of leverage to your skill or your confidence or the capital that you have, stashed to like weather and watch that leverage compound. Like, I would not spend my last dollar on hiring an EA because that might take 6 months to pay off. Unless you're putting them to work immediately as like, so that you can book more hours as as an agency that you're running, and that like turns into immediate cash flow, right? Like, there's so much to these contexts and every individual decision that like, it's very difficult to have a prescription other than like, be slightly careful and try to really understand the investment that you're making or the risk that you're taking, and know when you're making the kind of bet that you need to run faster and when you're making the kind of bet that you can slack up the pace. Like, they're different things. I have a friend who took on, he was in like the permanent, the private equity thing, and he had a bunch of jobs, but he took on debt, a big loan, a personally guaranteed loan to buy, I think it was a countertop creation business. And he moved his whole family across the country, took a personal line of debt, built this business. And so he like huge capital leverage, suddenly had a team of 20 people that he had just met, and all the customers and like the seller, like he was in the maximum, like he had added a ton of leverage, but he had also exposed himself to a massive downside really quickly. And he's like, this is the hardest year I've ever worked in my life. I have never had more on the line. I spent 20 years preparing for this moment and like getting ready to make this bet. But this is like, I have never worked harder with more at stake. That's a little different than, I worked really hard for a few months to like get into an angel investment that you're like, okay, the founders are taking this money and running with it. I would work hard to save the money and to put it in, but like, now I'm fine. Or I published this, I created this course, I worked really hard to sell it. Now I sold this course and now I have all this capital, and like, okay, now I can take a step back and like figure out how to apply this capital to the next thing, but I'm not like having to sprint to keep alive the leverage that I just invested. Like, I'm at a point where I can stop. So yeah, that's, I don't know, is the best answer I have for that question. I think, does that speak to the thing that you were hoping to hear? Okay.
It does. Well, we're at the 15 mark, so I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I'll give you just like kind of a hyphenated thing. Part of that question is just like, I'm curious from the tactical perspective, just like, how do you stay motivated? Because when you identify what the high leverage action is, then you have to actually, take it on. You have to, in a disciplined manner, kind of go after all this stuff. And it seems like you're somebody who's got the discipline to actually remain on point with all of these things. Do you know what I'm saying? And it takes some sort of a motivation to actually be properly pursuing all of these things in their proper order. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I would say there's like trade-offs between, it's also trade-offs between lifestyle, right? You're like, there's high leverage stuff that like you may not want to do, and that's totally fine, right? There is definitely like, I can't not work, and I also don't want to not work, like especially at this stage in my life. Like, I'm very and increasingly picky about the kind of work that I want to do, but that I think is good. It's good for my lifestyle and my happiness. And I have a long list of projects that I think are good ideas, and some of them are potentially even higher leverage, like companies to start that are like, oh, that would probably be successful. But like, is it better for the world or better for me that I do that than go like write this next book? Like, probably not. Like, I wouldn't be happier trying to start that company. And even if I think it would like make more money or whatever, it wouldn't have the impact, or it wouldn't have like the personal day-to-day rewardingness for me of like doing this other thing instead. So I think it is important to not always like, there's a stage of your life where, and I went through this, like you totally like optimize for income, like over almost everything. I think it's hopefully not super, super long, depending on, what else you're doing. But also if you don't feel like you have to do that, like great. Like you can make way better like lifestyle decisions as soon as you're out of that. So I don't think the pursuit of leverage is the pursuit of, the biggest financial outcome that you can. And I don't think any of the people that we were sort of following or talking about or studying would say that that's what they did, sort of at any point. But, to me, like I want to add, I could hire more assistants, but like, I don't know what they would do aside from ask me more questions and like not have enough work to do. That is not, and I probably could go get a high paying job or sell more stuff or, there's just use leverage in a way that suits you, like in the lifestyle that you want. Like I wanted on Friday, a friend called me and was like, I'm going to Costa Rica tomorrow. I have a spare room in the house. Like, do you want to come with? And I was like, sure. Like I can leave the country on 24 hours notice and like come hang with you in Costa Rica for the week and still do what I need to do or push everything from that week out of that week. That's a great life. There's a lot of stuff there's a lot of decisions that like, or a lot of paths that are potentially optimal paths that you can't take if you want to maintain like sort of that optionality. And to me, like that is a good use of leverage, is like everything stays on the rails, but I am still free to kind of do what I want, but I'm still having an impact and still hopefully like doing good and creating that positive things and supporting all the ideas that I believe in while I do all that.
Nice. So it's kind of relative to the aspirational lifestyle that you've thought through.
For sure.
Love it. Okay, great. So we've kept you 20 minutes past the hour. Thank you for being generous with your time.
Of course. If you guys know how to get a hold of me, I'm relatively easy to like email or Twitter DM. So if you have questions that I didn't answer here or whatever, feel free to holler at me and I'm happy to kind of do my best. And I don't know, hope it was interesting and helpful. And I think we're all carrying the Balaji flag to some extent or another. So I hope you're interested to see the book when that comes out and can help get some new people to drink the Kool-Aid.
Definitely. We'll all be reviewing it when it comes out for sure. Guaranteed. And
perfect. Appreciate it.
Yeah. It's an honor to have you here. And thank you, Cam, for bringing Eric as well. It was excellent.
Awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it.
Catch you later. Keep writing those essays. Dig them.
Perfect. Thank you.